Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jaya Kula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are.
I've been wondering about Jupiter and Saturn as guru and their different way as guru.
Jupiter is Prahaspati, the principle of guru, also of generosity and that giving quality, optimism, and access to wisdom that brings about, in the healthiest sense, cheerfulness and ability to ride with things and deal with life. But Jupiter's tricky because depending on the situation for Jupiter in somebody's chart, it could introduce a level of fantasy. And I've just seen this over and over again in my practice doing Jyotish for people, that a sort of weird kind of impatience that comes from optimism can creep in, or overconfidence, because Jupiter can bring healthy confidence, but it can also bring overconfidence. So when Jupiter's too strong, it creates these situations of like someone on cocaine at a party. It's just over the top. That's when it's like in an exalted condition that can often be extremely tricky. And if it's in a weaker condition, then all kinds of things can flow from that. But even if it's just in a regular old healthy condition, there can be ways that it needs to be tempered. And so Saturn can be an amazing balance for Jupiter, bringing more sobriety and modesty to Jupiter's woohoo, giving Jupiter more clear seeing. When Jupiter tends to be like, everything's going to be fine. Sometimes when there's a balance between Jupiter and Saturn, that's a really good thing. I was actually just thinking about this the other day, and I'm reminded of this beautiful teaching from Patrul Rinpoche, where he said, the lowest seat is the seat of the master. Saturn is taking the lowest seat. Saturn is the servant. The Saturn is the embodiment of the servant, and Jupiter is an embodiment of guru, but the servant is also part of being the teacher. On the one hand, you could say there are two bhavs, or two feeling tones or approaches to being guru. Or you could say that they might go hand in hand, tempering each other. Or they could be at odds. I guess Saturn could be really annoyed with Jupiter if Jupiter was this more overexcited character. But they can be in a really beautiful partnership. That attitude that Patrul Rinpoche had. There's that beautiful story. He was on the way to give a teaching. Of course, this was in Tibet. It actually wasn't all that long ago. But there was no transportation. And one of the things that was true in Tibet up until very current times was there really weren't paved roads. It was hard to get around, and most people got around on foot or by horse. He was walking to this teaching, and it was really far. And on the way, he met this woman with a child, and the woman didn't have enough food. She was also going to the teaching, but she was very, very poor. She didn't have enough food, so Patrul just accompanied her, and together they made meals and stuff like that. But he never told her he was the teacher at this teaching. And then before they arrived, she said to him, I think we make a really good team. Let's get married. We helped each other and it was really sweet. Let's get married. And he said, well, yeah, I can't really do that, but thanks. I appreciate the offer. So then he just said, I have to go over here and meet some people. Again, he didn't tell her he was the teacher. And then, he was sitting on his seat, which probably wasn't the lowest seat, because at those teachings they put the lamas up on these thrones. And there was a long line of people to greet him, including the woman that he'd been traveling with. When she saw him there, she was absolutely astonished. And then he directed that all the donations given to him at the teaching should be given to her. So very, very beautiful example of taking the lowest seat in a certain sense.
Will you talk more about Saturn?
Well, Saturn's always pictured as an old person and kind of withered and stern. We can think of all of these gods or planets, whichever way we're thinking of them, as organizations of intelligence and feeling. There are particular ways of encountering intelligence and feeling, or particular forms of guidance that are structures of intelligence and feeling. We don't need to think of them as a planet, right? They're really forces. And the force of Saturn is, to my mind, a practitioner's best friend, absolutely, without a doubt. Because Saturn says, look, and forces us to look at the things that we need to look at. Saturn is the soul of sobriety, completely without fantasy, absolutely clear seeing, the essence of clear seeing. We could not practice without that. I mean, we could, but it would not go to where we want to go. Saturn is what shows us our pride, shows us where we have unclarity in our approach to things. Saturn is about perseverance and discipline. And it's also about modesty and working behind the scenes and the beauty of the servant. All of the aspects of servanting belong to that field that we call Saturn. There have always been teachers that are more Jupiterian and teachers that are more Saturn-like or some combination thereof. And also Venus. Venus is also a guru. Venus is the guru of everyday life, teaching us ordinary conduct, which is important. I revere that principle of Saturn. And as someone who has a very strong Jupiter in my chart, Saturn is definitely my saving grace in terms of not going off the rails with Jupiterian overenthusiasm. I've already had to deal enough with that. You know, when you follow Saturn, when you understand what Saturn represents and what Saturn is bringing into your life, and you have respect and reverence for that, then you really find out what the rewards of spiritual practice are. People fear Saturn because Saturn creates difficulties sometimes, but we all know that the result of letting ourselves be reshaped by difficulties is that we come to a new landscape that's much richer. And that's what Saturn does for us. So this is why it's said that if you are really the servant of the servant, then the rewards are far beyond what you could have imagined. Not rewards in like the usual sense, but spiritual rewards. When Saturn's not in a good condition in your chart, you're not reaping the benefit, the full benefit of Saturn because of whatever karma one came in with. It can be involved in things to do with chronic depression particularly. And then sometimes with anxiety. Saturn is an air planet. Saturn can cause temporary heaviness of mind that might be useful, but then it can also cause things that are more chronic, that are more difficult. In the Hindu pantheon of deities, each deity has what's called a vehicle. For instance, the vehicle of Kali is Lord Shiva. This is why you often see Kali standing on top of Shiva. The vehicle of Ganesha is the mouse, the little mouse that's always racing around his feet. And of Durga, a tiger or a lion, depending on the image. The vehicle of Saturn is a crow. I'm not 100% remembering why, but obviously a crow is also black, which is the color of Saturn, dark blue or black. And the crow is very, very intelligent, but also kind of ubiquitous. There are crows everywhere. You can't be like a standout crow.
I'm actually reading this beautiful book called Birding to Save the World. And it talks about they're so smart in Japan, they will drop walnuts on the road so the cars can run over them and crack them.
Oh, wow.
They're wrong.
They just think of us as their tools.
Yeah.
This is my first time, and I was kind of wondering if you would explain a little bit about what this is and the history behind it a bit.
Sure. That's a great question, and I don't know why people don't ask that question more often. Jaya Kula is a spiritual community. We're a nonprofit community, and we started in 2007 when I moved from the Bay Area to Portland. The teachings that I'm giving are from two different traditions. One stream of teachings is from Trika Shaivism, sometimes also called Kashmir Shaivism. That's from Northwest India, from Kashmir and what is now Pakistan. That's where these teachings come from. And then the other set of teachings is from Dzogchen, sort of my second teacher, Namkhai Norbu. Both of these traditions share a lot of view and many practices that they hold in common. There are differences between them, but they're basically the same kind of tradition. The idea of both traditions is that your real nature, what you really are, and what this world actually is available to be discovered by you using your own body, energy, and mind. You don't need to believe in anything or have faith in anything. Using certain tools, you can open the gates of your senses and discover for yourself what's really happening here. That's the basis of what is called direct realization traditions. The job of the teacher in these traditions is to make that as available to you as possible. So you come, everyone comes in a different condition, and people are going to have different degrees of realization, wildly different. But the job of the teacher is to make it possible for you to realize as much as you can in this lifetime. All of these traditions rely heavily on the relationship between students and teachers, because there's this kind of alchemy that happens where you can experience certain things about your real nature through the medium of the teacher. That process is called transmission. Unlike some other traditions, including the Abrahamic traditions that are more focused on gods and deities, this tradition is more focused on the student-teacher relationship. We do have deities also, but they're not really the central thing in these traditions. These traditions are very practical. They are not transcendental. They're not thinking that there's something degraded about everyday life. We're working with everyday life to help us to discover what's actually going on here, and then become more skillful and more compassionate and experience more primordial intelligence and clarity and all that good stuff. The community here is focused on practice, supposedly. My focus is on doing practice, doing what's called sadhana, mantra, meditation, kriya yoga. Being in community is also a practice. Satsang is also a practice. Really, I'm doing this because I have really enjoyed what I've realized from doing these practices, and I would like other people to be able to enjoy that too. So that's what we're doing, and we have a pretty tight-knit community in the sense that a lot of us are engaged in things in everyday ways together, not just coming to a satsang or going to a retreat or something like that. We are in contact with each other quite a bit. And this is really typical of these traditions where you have many, many opportunities to remember who you are. And one of those is to be in community. That helps us to remember who we actually are. If anybody else who's not been around too long, or even if you have and you just forgot what the heck we're doing here, if you feel like asking a question, feel free. In this vein, I mean. I think we don't talk about this enough.
Yeah. Can you talk about satsang as spiritual practice?
Well, anytime you're with the teacher, it's sadhana. Because the idea is that the teacher's in a certain condition, hopefully, and that has impacts on things. It has impacts on the form of communication that's happening, on just the energetic feel of things. And so just sitting with a teacher, I mean, satsang means being in reality together, but the implication is that the reason you're more experiencing reality is because you're with someone who's more experiencing reality than you are. And that has this kind of overflow alchemical effect on you. The other thing is that we're engaging in a certain kind of dialogue, and the dialogic form of satsang is basically our form of life here. And we're kind of getting in with that by asking questions and hearing answers and sharing. We're getting in on the conversation that God is having, that we're the players in. And we're doing it with more awareness. In a sense, because of the free-flowing nature of satsang, we're exercising more of our freedom here. So pay attention to that kind of thing when you're in satsang, and then you'll be able to deepen your experience of it. Right. Ma compared satsang to water dripping on stone. That it's very, very slow, but eventually the water's going to make a hole in the stone and start rushing through.
I'm asking almost the same question. I'm wondering what makes something a practice.
Definitely something that repeats, because we're like the stones, right? So the water has to drip a lot of times to get through the stone. On the one hand, whenever you're with the teacher, you're with someone who is focused on your realization. So there's always things happening that are coming from the teacher to turn this into sadhana for you, whether you notice it or not. Whenever you're around a teacher in this kind of tradition, then you're around someone who is creating circumstances in every moment to try to turn this into sadhana for people. Someone that I've known for many, many years called me and said, I'd really like us to be friends. And I said, I don't know what I said, but it wasn't satisfying. And she said, you know what I mean? Like actual friends, like regular friends. And I didn't say it at the time, but I'm not really capable of doing that. I can't say exactly why, but on the one hand, I could say I'm not really interested. On another hand, I could say that it just never happens that way in my life. And it never really has happened that way in my life, where there's some sort of only ordinary friendship happening. It's just never been that way. So she's very dissatisfied with me. She feels like she's been turned down or something, but that's not really the case. It's just how I am. So there's always something intentional happening. And even though like I didn't have a spiritual life when I was a little girl, I was still always so interested in people being more free. Whether I was expressing that in some ordinary way or in a political way or in a so-called spiritual way, that was always what was most important to me, is other people should be more free. So that's your relationship with a teacher. You're being around someone who wants you to be more free. The second way in which everything is sadhana is because of your relationship to it. Everything here is made of wisdom, and there's always wisdom guiding you in every moment. However, as we know, we can ignore that. Maybe we're ignoring it because we don't have the sensitivity to it yet. Maybe we're ignoring it because we don't have the tools to do anything with it. Maybe we're ignoring it because we have all kinds of concepts and dogma that are causing us to relate to things in a way that isn't really about sadhana. Maybe we have the tools and we have the awareness and we even have a teacher, but we just don't really feel like doing it. We don't really feel like relating to things as sadhana. We'd rather just get really upset and suffer about everything. That's our prerogative too. But when we have the tools and we have the sensitivity, we can relate to every single aspect of our lives as sadhana. We can always be relating to the wisdom in everything and always be trying to relax and be in life in a more spontaneous, perceptually open way, more heart-based way. So we can be making every single moment of our lives sadhana if we so choose, and if we have that skill and that sensitivity too. Because wisdom is subtle. And so in order to perceive it, we have to be subtle also. Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jaya Kula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, Please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.